Hi, this is Garry Harrington. I'm the director of Rum Village Nature Center here in South Bend. And at Rum Village Nature Center, I teach people about nature and wildlife. And I'd like to talk to you today about a really cool aspect of wildlife. This is an animal found all over our area, birds. And birds are one of those animals you can tell just like that. They have wings. Most of them on our planet fly. And so we kind of overlook birds, I think, because of the fact that they're found everywhere. We kind of take them for granted. And actually, when somebody sees a little bird, they think, oh yeah, that guy's just wimpy. Birds aren't tough like other kinds of animals. And actually, that's not true. Birds are really, really tough. And so I want us to do a little experiment here. I want us to do a little demo that actually illustrates that birds are a lot tougher than we think. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to put our arms out like that, pretend we are birds. These are our wings, and we're going to begin flapping like this. So we'll start flapping and flapping, flapping. I want you to keep flapping the whole time you're doing this. You can just stand up where you are, keep flapping like this. Some people are probably getting tired already. Well, here's the thing. Birds are not wimpy at all. They're pretty tough. They have to migrate, and sometimes they migrate nonstop 24 hours straight. So imagine doing this for the next 24 hours and not taking a break, because that's exactly what some birds do. And by the time most humans do this for this long, their arms are, But birds have to do that continuously, or they'll fall in the ocean, some of them, as they're migrating. So their lives depends on them having the strength to flap for 24 hours like that. All right, we'll give our arms a little rest there. It's really amazing the strength that birds have. One of the ways that birds can do that so easily is the fact that all of their strong muscles are in their chest, and that's what powers them. Our strong muscles are in our legs, and that's what allows us to run. We can run a marathon, some of us, 26.2 miles nonstop. So birds and people are different, but that doesn't matter. Birds are still very tough in their own right. And birds are really interesting in other ways, too. When it comes to beaks and bills, we kind of take those for granted as well. But it's amazing the different kinds of abilities different birds have regarding their beaks and bills. So let's take a look at some of those. And actually, I've got one right here to start with. There it is. This is actually a foot. And we're going to start with some feet and then look at some beaks and bills, I think. This is a foot that belongs to a bird that you might recognize. It is a foot that kind of looks like a duck's foot, only it's bigger than a duck. And they're very, very common. They're found all over the area now. And as you might guess, it is the foot of a Canada goose. And it's really interesting to look at feet, because when we look at their feet, they can give us clues as to how they live. And so if we look at this foot, we can see, first of all, he's got a toe there, he's got one there, he's got one there. Stretched in between those toes is material called webbing. So he's got a web foot. And we know that frogs have a web foot, and we know that beavers have a web foot. They all live in the water. And this is what helps them propel through the water. And the same is true of ducks and geese. They have a web foot that helps them to swim through the water quickly like a paddle. So this is exactly the kind of foot that you need if you are a bird that lives in the water for paddling. I have another kind of foot that we're going to look at here. Here's another foot. There it is. And this foot does not have any webbing between the toes at all. If you tried to paddle with a foot like this, you wouldn't get anywhere. So obviously this foot is not made for swimming in the water, but it's actually made for walking on the land and scratching in the soil. And this foot belongs to a bird that we do have in our area. I see them from time to time. It's a bird called a pheasant, a ring-necked pheasant. So there's the pheasant, and here is his foot, and I'll show you how he uses his foot. He uses his foot for walking, and he uses his foot for scratching like that. And he'll scratch up nice juicy insects to eat, or maybe he'll find seeds to eat. but he'll use his foot for walking and running and scratching. So this is the kind of foot that you need for walking and scratching and finding your food. All right, lastly, one of my favorite kinds of feet. Here it is, check that out. So this is the kind of foot that you need not for swimming, it wouldn't be good for that, really not for scratching, even though it's very, very sharp, and you could scratch with a foot like this, but it's not used for scratching into the soil. It's used for hanging on to food that this guy's going to have for dinner. This belongs to a great horned owl. And great horned owls are predators, just like eagles and hawks. And they have long, sharp claws. See how long and sharp that claw is? It's something called a talon. And so this is how they use their feet. They will find a bird or a mouse that they want to catch for dinner, and they will fly down. They will grasp on with those talons. They will squeeze it, and in just a second, it's no longer alive. It doesn't do that to be mean or to be cruel. That's the way Mother Nature made them. They're made to eat things like rodents and mice and other kinds of animals. So this is the kind of foot that you need for hunting. And every kind of foot, it's interesting, has its own kind of purpose. That's true of feet. It's also true of beaks and bills. So I have a few beaks and bills here that we're going to talk about as well. Let's start with this one right here. This bill looks like it's got a little bit of kind of reddish on the end of it, and that tells me, aha, maybe this was the bill belonging to the state bird of Indiana, and it was indeed from a northern cardinal. And we know this about cardinals. They're often seen at the bird feeder in the back eating the food that we put out there. So if we're talking about food that we put out for birds, then we're talking about seeds. So they're seed eaters. And I think I actually have a picture here of our cardinal. Let's see if I can find that for you. Here we are. There's a picture of the cardinal. The state bird of Indiana represents the state of Indiana. Not the whole country, but just Indiana. So when it comes to having a bill that's designed for cracking open tough-shelled seeds, this is exactly what you need. This is a bill designed for cracking open seeds. And in the case of Rum Village, we put out lots and lots of sunflowers. And it draws a lot of different kinds of birds, including this cardinal. He's got the bill designed for cracking open seeds so we can get the nut portion out of the middle. All right. Oh, another bill here. Another one of my favorites. There it is. It's a really long bill. Sometimes I'll ask people, do you know what kind of bird this belongs to? And they will say, it looks like a woodpecker's bill. And I guess it kind of does look like a woodpecker, although it'd be a really big woodpecker, but it is long like maybe the bill of a woodpecker. It actually belongs to a bird that loves to hunt. And I often see these in different places like Potato Creek. I've actually seen them here at Rum Village in the past. They like to be in wet areas where they can find their favorite food, which is fish. This belongs to a great blue heron. Let me get the picture of the great blue heron and show that to you. There he is. And this is a bird that used to be uncommon in this area. They've made a really big comeback, great blue heron. So I'm proud to say that we have a lot of herons in our area when we didn't years ago. So this is a success story when it comes to the great blue. Here is his bill. And so this is what he does. He's a really good hunter. He will fly around, and he will fly over a body of water. He'll find a good place to hunt, and he will land. And he will wade. He's got long legs, and he'll wade through the water looking for his favorite food, which is fish. Now, he has really good camouflage. That means he blends in well with his environment. He's kind of gray color, so he looks like an old dead tree in the water. And so he can kind of disguise himself, blend in, and wait for a little fish to come by. And then he can look down there and say, aha, there's my breakfast. So the little fish moves closer, he moves closer, the fish moves closer, he moves closer. Then right at the right time, Just like that, he'll grab that fish. The fish never knows what's coming because he's such a good and stealthy hunter. So he'll gobble that fish, down it'll go. If it's a little fish, that's easy. He will just grab it and then swallow it whole. If it's a bigger fish, he'll swallow that whole too, but it's a little bit trickier. He'll take his bill like that and he'll stab it. And then while the fish is flopping around, he will very carefully work that fish all the way down to the end of his bill, and then he'll swallow it head first. And it's kind of weird because I've seen fish do this before, great blue herons. You can watch that fish go all the way down the length of his throat, all the way down to his stomach. It's almost like watching a snake eat. And he's got to be very careful, though. Even though he might stab it, the fish can get away. Even though he's wounded, if he gets off the end of his bill, he'll swim off into deep water. He can't get them. He only hunts in very shallow water, water that's only about that deep. And he's smart. He will swallow it head first every time because they have fins, something called fins that stick out like that are sharp, and they protect the fish. So he knows this: if he swallows a fish head first, all those fins will collapse and he can easily swallow it. Swallowing it backwards would not be a good thing. Those fins would get stuck in his throat. So he's smart, he swallows them head first, and they go all the way down. All right. Last but not least, maybe my favorite beak of all. Here it is. He belongs to the same kind of bird that we saw earlier, which is a great blue heron. So we saw the great blue heron. This belongs to the guy who has the same kind of foot as this. This belongs to a great horned owl. So the great horned owl has a specialized bill that is designed to help him eat animals that he catches. He doesn't catch seeds. He doesn't have a long, skinny bill designed to stab fish and swallow fish. He's got a hook-shaped bill that helps him eat, for the most part, animals, especially mice and rats and maybe small rodents like a chipmunk. That's what he has for his food. And so he will use, as we've said before, he will use his talons. This is the hunting part of the guy, more so than his bill. He will use that. He will catch that animal. If it's a small little mouse, he can gobble that down easy. If it's a great big animal, he will use his bill to take it apart piece by piece and swallow it one part at a time. So he uses this kind of the way we use a knife and fork and spoon. He doesn't have a knife and fork and spoon, of course, but he's got something just as good that came from Mother Nature, his sharp bill. And so he can take that animal apart piece by piece, swallow it down, and that's the way Mother Nature intended them to eat. So every kind of bird has a different kind of purpose for its beak or its bill, including their feet. They all designed to do a certain task for that animal. All right, next we're going to talk a little bit more about birds. All right, we talked earlier about great horned owls. I'm going to talk a little bit more about great horned owls right now, and I'm going to start by showing actually a picture of a great horned owl. Here it is. Here's a great horned owl, and there is a baby right in the same nest there. And the great horned owl is really a neat bird. We don't see them very often unless it's at night, and usually when we see them at all, it's just a fleeting glimpse of them maybe flying quickly in front of our eyes. But great horned owls do live at Rum Village Nature Center. They nest here, and we've actually had them nesting very close to the Nature Center in the past. So great horned owls are around, and they are really good hunters. One of the things that makes them good hunters, of course, is the fact that they have a sharp beak and they have talons to catch their prey. They also have excellent hearing and eyesight, and they have really big eyes in proportion to the size of their body. And it's said that, get this, if a person had eyes as big as a great horned owl, they'd be as big as tennis balls, so it'd look like that. Which would be kind of weird, wouldn't it, to have eyeballs that big? But you'd miss very little. Even in pitch dark, you could still see mice and rodents that are scurrying around. So those great big eyes work very well for them. Oh, one of the things that is kind of unique about owls and most birds in our world is they don't have what we have, which is a sense of smell. So they can eat things that maybe other animals would not want to eat. For example, how about this guy? A skunk. So here's what's weird about this. They actually will eat skunks. And I used to help my former boss here at Rum Village. She would sometimes get injured birds of prey, including owls. And oftentimes when she would have one that she needed assistance with, I would help her with that. And I would notice, gosh, this guy smells a lot like a skunk. And I learned that they'll actually eat skunks. They don't have a sense of smell. The smell of skunks doesn't bother them. And so at the time, mom has a baby like this one in the nest. It's generally very early in spring or even in late winter when they nest. They don't nest in springtime like most birds do. So they have their nests late in the year, about the same time that skunks are coming out of hibernation. So mom is smart. She knows that pretty soon there'll be a lot of food coming her way in the form of skunks. So a skunk can feed a family for several days as opposed to a whole bunch of little mice. If she's fortunate enough, she can catch a great big skunk like this. So not too many animals out there are eating skunks. She got almost all the skunks to herself at a time when she's got hungry babies to feed in early spring, or actually more like late winter. All right. One thing that's special about birds is their way of communication. We all like to hear birds early in springtime calling one another. It's kind of a neat thing. It's a reminder that, that finally winter is going by the wayside, spring is coming, the weather's getting better, and certainly the sound of birds calling is kind of a reminder that good weather is on the way. So one thing that I have here that I use sometimes for programs is something called an identifier. It's kind of a play on word because it helps us to identify animals that are calling and flying in the air, namely birds. So this is how the identifier works. I can turn it on like that. It's got a switch on the side. I've got a bunch of cards that they almost look like credit cards with a bunch of bird photos on them. I can take this and put it inside the identifier like that. I can turn up the volume, and then I can push the button, and I can hear whatever birds that I want to hear by pushing the button next to their bodies. For example, a good one is the state bird of Indiana. Here it is. I'm going to push the button and listen. We might not think about this, but every kind of bird species has its own kind of call. When I was young, I often thought, all birds are kind of boring. They just go tweet, 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 tweet. I didn't realize that they have their own voices. People have their own voices, of course. That's how we can tell one family member from another. Even when we can't see them, we can tell who's talking just by the sound of their voice. The same is true of birds. Sometimes people will go out in the woods, including me, and we will take something called binoculars. And we take those binoculars and we look high up in the trees for different kinds of birds. And sometimes, even with strong binoculars that magnify the image of a bird that's far away, even strong binoculars sometimes make it very difficult to tell what kind of bird that you're seeing. But here's the thing. If you know what some of the birds, you don't have to know all the birds, but if you know some of the bird calls, you can tell just like that who's around, even if you don't see them. So that's why the identifier comes in really handy. I can tell when there are cardinals around, and I do have a picture of a cardinal here. So this is our state bird of Indiana. It represents the state of Indiana. A few other states like Illinois have this is the same state bird, but this one that we think about mostly when we think about birds in Indiana and being represented here. Let's see, we also have another kind of bird, another kind of call, just to show that different kinds of birds have different kinds of calls, and everyone has their own distinct call. Here is one, I'm going to show that picture right now. Here it is, a red-winged blackbird. This is another common bird, just like this, the cardinal is common. These guys are common too. Usually they're found in wetland areas. And we often see these guys out in places where there's a lot of cattails, and they're often along the river, and they're often along different kinds of wetland areas. So here is their call. I'm going to push the button right next to the blackbird. Here's what it sounds like. All right, well, you can probably tell that these calls sound very different. I'm going to play it again. Here is the one for the state bird of Indiana, the cardinal. And here is the one for the blackbird. So let's do this. Let's have a little vote. How many people think thumbs up means yes, thumbs down means no? How many people think that yes, the cardinal sounds just like the blackbird? Or how many people think, maybe not so much? Well, you know what? I agree with you. I don't think they sound very much like one another at all. That's how I can tell one bird from another. We know a cardinal doesn't sound like a blackbird doesn't sound like a mallard duck doesn't sound like a red-tailed hawk. So that's how we can tell them apart from one another. All right, so lastly, we're going to take a look at some other bird pictures and some other bird parts. All right, the last thing I want to do is talk a little bit about birds and bird nests. So in springtime, that's when birds generally are building their nests. And here's the weird thing about birds and nests. Birds do not go to school to learn how to build nests. They're not engineers that go to places like Purdue and learn about how to construct things. They are engineers in their own right. Mother Nature makes them engineers, and especially the females. It's the females, for the most part, that build the bird's nests. And every nest is constructed in a different kind of way, although they generally serve the same purpose. They're a place where mom and sometimes dad can help raise their young. So let's take a look at a few nests. I've got one right here. Here's our first nest. And this is the nest of a bird known as a robin. And I actually have a picture here of a robin. I'm going to hold that up as well. And it's a bird that I would say most people are familiar with. So we have robins all over the place, and they come back in really big numbers in the springtime. I'm seeing robins around my neighborhood right now. Here's something that's kind of cool about robins' nests. Yes, they don't go to engineering school to learn how to build a nest like this. They're born with that information in their heads. And mom is the one who builds the nest. And what she does is she will go out and find the materials that she needs. She knows exactly how to build a robin's nest. She doesn't try to build a great blue heron nest. She doesn't try to build a duck's nest. She makes a nest that Mother Nature designed in her head to be made for robins. And so she will go out and get materials to make this nest. We know this. She doesn't use a wheelbarrow. She doesn't use a pickup truck. What does a bird have to use to make its nest? And the answer is not really its feet, but more than anything, its beak or bill. So she will go out and she will find mud in certain areas, and she will come back with mud in her bill. Can she haul a lot of mud in her bill? No. So she has to make trips, one trip back and forth, trip after trip. And it might take her several days to get enough mud to construct a nest. And when she'll find that mud, she'll also look for things like this. She'll look for little materials like this. It almost looks like string, but actually, if we look a little bit closely, I'm going to turn it that way. we can see that it's really made of grass. So she uses grass on wet mud, and then once she gets it just the shape that she likes, when it's still wet and hasn't formed, she will hop inside that nest. She will wiggle around. She'll make it just the right shape to fit her body. That way, her eggs will be protected, and she won't jump into the nest and go and crush her eggs. So she knows exactly what she's doing. It works very well for robins to build this kind of nest. They're generally built on a branch, kind of like that. Sometimes they'll build them close to people's homes, and that was the case when I was a kid living in River Park. We often had a robin nest that was built right outside the front steps. So this is the kind of nest you build if you are a robin. So different kinds of birds build different kinds of nests. Just as we discussed earlier, different kinds of birds have different kinds of feet and beaks and bills that have different purposes. So let's take a look at another here. We will start with a picture of the bird. Here it is. This is an oriole, a bird that's commonly seen in our area in springtime. Beautiful birds that have a pretty song, pretty common anymore in our area. So this is Baltimore oriole. And here is the oriole's nest. There it is. This nest is a little old, but it's been through a lot because this nest was built high up in a branch in a tree. And it's not made of mud, and it's not really made of sticks and some of the materials that a robin might use. The oriole uses different kinds of grasses woven together. And so the mother will use her beak and her feet to hold things together so she can weave that high up in a branch. And so this might be 30 feet off the ground. She's got to do a really good job because this has to withstand, in some cases, terrible storms that this nest might have to endure, and the baby's inside. So the last thing she wants to do is have the nest fall to the ground. So she's very careful how she constructs this. She does a really good job, and the eggs are placed right inside there because she has very precious cargo inside there. She wants to keep this nest there as long as she needs it, and it will stay there usually until the next year. And by that time, it's maybe beaten up enough by hard weather in the middle of November and December and all through winter. Then oftentimes I'll find these on the ground. All right, let's see. We have another one. Oh yes, one of my favorite kinds of birds. Here it is. This is a hummingbird. This is actually a ruby-throated hummingbird. And we do have hummingbirds throughout our area in the springtime. And so it's kind of rare, though, to find their nest. It's much more common to see the bird themselves. Not very often do we find the nest. So I've actually got a model here. I've got a model here of the nest. It's not the actual nest. The actual nests are pretty rare and hard to come by. But I'm going to show you there. I'm going to point to the nest. It's very tiny. So that tells us something. Hummingbirds are very tiny as well. So it's a tiny bird that makes a tiny nest. That makes a lot of sense. If it's a tiny bird with a tiny nest, then it must have a tiny egg. And I've got a model, again, of an egg that looks just like the real thing. Really tiny. The size of a very small jelly bean. And mom usually makes 2 of these, and she puts them right there in the nest. And they are usually placed on a branch, and they're small. They're kind of hard to find. They're camouflaged. She will put moss and lichen on the outside to camouflage them and protect them. So it's not very often that we find a nest of a hummingbird. All right, so we just saw a hummingbird. We saw that egg. It's really, really tiny. If a tiny bird has a tiny egg in a tiny nest, then that means maybe a really big bird has a really big nest and has really big eggs. So I've got a bird in mind here that fits that description. Here it is. Our national bird, not our state bird, but one that represents all of Indiana, the bald eagle. Bald eagles are really big birds. Bald eagles are birds that have a wingspan farther than I can stretch. I'm stretching out my arms as hard as I can. So they can stretch just about 7 feet. So they're really big, really tall birds. And so they build a gigantic nest. They have gigantic eggs compared to a hummingbird. Maybe I can hold them both up here like that. There's that itty bitty little hummingbird right here. Here's a great big bald eagle egg. Does have a very large egg, and so it has a very large nest. So the nest is from a bald eagle. Sometimes they're as far as I can stretch this way and back that way. They make a very big circular nest. Do they use little bitty branches? No, they use great big branches. And sometimes the nests are so big and so heavy that they crash to the ground, unfortunately, because every year they keep building them and building them and building them. And they build them up, in some cases, till they get so big and heavy that they crash to the ground. And they've measured the weight of a bald eagle nest, and they found out, get this, it weighs 2,000 pounds, about as much as a Volkswagen weighs. So they build enormous nests. All right, last but not least, we are going to look at, I think, some really cool birds. And I think you guys will like these too. Some birds are very common in the area, some birds not as rare. Some birds are really quick, some birds not so fast. But I'm going to give you guys a little quiz here. I'm going to let you kind of decide what animals, not just birds, we're going to make this animals, and some of them around the planet, which ones are the fastest on the planet? So I've got some pictures here. We're going to start with this one. Here's a picture that you guys might be familiar with, a road runner. If he's called a road runner, he must be pretty fast, right? So here's a picture of the road runner, a bird that lives out west, not so much in the South Bend area, and not at all in the state of Indiana, but out west in places like Colorado, and definitely places like Arizona. Let's see. Oh, something that's not a bird at all, but something that's known to be really fast, and that is a cheetah. So there's a picture of a cheetah. The last one I have here is a peregrine falcon. There's a picture of a peregrine falcon. So let's vote. I want you can either vote in your head, or you can vote by giving a thumbs up and a thumbs down if you don't agree. Which one of these animals do you think is the fastest on the planet? Is it A, the roadrunner? Is it B, the cheetah? Don't have cheetahs in the United States, of course, but they live on the other side of the world in Africa. Really fast animal. Or C, a peregrine falcon. All right, well, I will tell you this. Roadrunners are really fast. They can move pretty quickly. They can move 15 to 20 miles an hour, and they can outrun and outmaneuver a lot of predators. Cheetahs. Cheetahs are very fast as well. They can go 70 miles an hour. That's really fast. But the granddaddy of them all, this guy, peregrine falcon. Peregrine falcons can go, get this, 200 miles an hour. And how can they do that? Well, they will fly up really high in the air, and then they will start to fly really fast. They flap like crazy going downward. They kind of tuck their wings in. They get very aerodynamic, and they can go up to speeds of 200 miles an hour. And here's the amazing thing. The fastest animal on our planet is right in the heart of downtown South Bend. As a matter of fact, you can see them nesting on the county city building, and when you're at the right place at the right time in downtown South Bend, you can see them flying overhead. And we're fortunate that every year for the past 15 years, more than that, they've been nesting in downtown South Bend. And actually, I have a picture here of a baby peregrine falcon that was taken in downtown South Bend. They were actually banding the baby peregrine falcons so they could track them and if they could ever get a picture of the band on its leg, they would know exactly where that came from. They'd know that it was a bird banned in South Bend, Indiana. And that gives scientists and researchers information that helps them to better protect birds like peregrine falcons, which are in the state of Indiana endangered. There's not very many peregrine falcons found in the state. We're lucky to have those in the heart of South Bend. Well, that's all we have to talk about today about birds. I hope you learned some new things about birds. And if you have a chance, just watch birds. Birds are all around us. We're fortunate to see them. We need to appreciate birds more, and we need to protect them because some birds' numbers are going down. Some birds are in real trouble. But if we protect birds, we'll have plenty of birds around for many, many years to come. Thank you.